Welcome everybody to another episode in the Carboneg Living Soil and Regenerative Agriculture podcast. My name is Kevin Perujo Holland and I'm your host. And I'm joined here today with Dale Strickler. Thank you, Dale, for joining us today. It's an honor to have you here.
It's my pleasure to be here. So thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. So Dale Strickler, for those who don't know him, he's an agronomist, a regen ag, you could say living soil promoter. He's an author, and above all, he's a farmer. He's also the chief agronomist, I believe, of the Green Cover seed company in the US.
Used to be.
Used to be.
Now I have my own company.
Exactly. I was actually wondering if you could tell us a bit about regenerative wisdom now that you're telling us about it.
I formed this company because I wanted to concentrate on information rather than selling a product. And so I do speaking, consulting, like on-farm consultations, speaking at events, things like that, spreading information, trying to help people become more profitable and to improve their soil and improve their footprint on the planet.
That's fantastic.
Well, my philosophy is that agriculture is essentially should be working with nature and harvesting sunlight and natural ecosystems do that. And the biggest mistake we made in agriculture was trying to dominate nature and trying to suppress nature. And what we typically find when we fight nature, we spend a lot of money and we eventually lose.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So people assume that if you're going to protect and promote the environment, that it's going to cost you money. I believe it's more profitable to work with nature and a lot more enjoyable.
Definitely.
Because nobody likes losing.
Yeah.
And so when you work with nature, it's a win-win situation. So,
and Dale,
that's how I roll.
That's fantastic. And that leads me to the next point I want to make. So you've reached this stage now where you have your own company, Regenerative Wisdom, and you want to share this wisdom, you could say, with everyone. And if you can tell us a bit how you got there from your first, let's say, contact with agriculture. Briefly, maybe it's a very long story.
It's a very long story,
but there's some key moments maybe in your life that, let's say, led you to what you're doing today and your impact.
So I grew up on a farm, and on that farm we did tillage, fallow periods in between crops, all the things that I preach against now. And so used herbicides, and I'm not anti-herbicide. But I prefer to have a system where those inputs are not needed. If in an emergency situation, it's okay to use them, but I prefer to have a system where they're not needed. And so, having grown up in this system, I really did not like farming very much. It was endless hours on a tractor, disturbing the soil, turning soil into dust, unpleasant, and just miserable. And so went to college and to be an engineer, and because I wanted away from the farm. And once I got to college, I've always enjoyed nature. And it was just miserable to me to be in a city away from nature. And my roommates were all agriculture majors. And I would come home from class bored out of my mind by what I'd learned in class. They were so excited about what they had learned in class. And they would have these arguments and discussions, and I said, this seems so much more fun than what I'm learning. And so I thought, I'll take an agriculture class. So I took a crop science class. And when I handed in my first test, when we received the test back and it was graded, the professor wrote on said a note, "See me after class." I thought, oh no, I'm in trouble. He thought I cheated or something. And he got to his office, he handed me a magazine about this was in the 1980s, a magazine about regenerative farming. And before regenerative farming was ever a word, there was a magazine about it in the US, and very low subscription. I mean, not many people read this magazine.
I can imagine.
But he handed it to me, and I read it cover to cover, and it was about farming with nature instead of farming by fighting nature. It was about cover crops and you know, different ways of raising livestock, and so it just it was an epiphany. It really completely altered the way I thought about everything. I said, farming with nature solves everything. It cures everything. And so from that point on, I became obsessed with learning. The farm that we grew up on, very heavy clay soils, and every spring it was muddy and the crops would look wonderful, and then by the 15th of July, everything was dead or nearly dead. You know, our corn crops would fail. Our clay was so heavy that when it rained, the water ran right off, didn't penetrate into the soil. And the roots didn't penetrate into the soil. And I thought we lived in a desert. When I went to college and I found out that we actually live in a high rainfall area, but because our soil was so poor, we couldn't raise good crops. And I thought, you know, if I can fix this soil, we can live fat and happy the rest of our lives. And so fixing the soil, working with nature instead of fighting nature, and using biology, that became my passion. And I've carried that forward. Planted my first cover crop in 1988, and had to fight my father to do it. He said, okay, you can do this, but you have to pay me rent on this field, and I'm giving you my worst field.
Okay.
Said, so you have to rent the worst field we have, the lowest yielding field. You rent it from me, and I'll let you try this. And you can receive, you know, all the income. The next year, that field was the best yielding field that we had. And my father said, kid, I think you're on to something. And so from that point on, my father seemed to have the same epiphany that I had. And he made it, when anyone would mention the word no-till to him, his face would turn red, and the veins would bulge on his neck. It would make him incredibly angry, because to him that was lazy. That was lazy farming. That's the type of farming that lazy people do. And laziness was the ultimate sin to my father. And he believed in hard work. And he a system of farming that required less work was just against his nature. So, but when my brother and I, we showed him no-till farms around. We went and visited other farms, and that were successfully no-tilling. And at first he said, "Well, this can work here, but it won't work where I farm."
Yeah, around here.
It won't work around here. And so he said, "How do you know?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, I'll try it." And I think partially because we were already cover cropping when he made the transition to no-till, we'd created a little bit higher organic matter. And so our soils, the combination of no-till and cover crops were very successful. And he didn't experience a reduction in yields. His yields went up automatically. And so he was very happy, and he became, last few years of his life, he was like an evangelist. He would chase people down the street to tell them about no-till farming. And, people would see him coming, "Oh no, he's going to tell me about no-till. I'll go the other way." But yeah, so that's been my life's journey. And now I'm doing really what I've been wanting to do for 30, 40 years, and that's spend all my time sharing regenerative agriculture with people and helping them become more profitable and helping them to be happier. And because this is a much more enjoyable way of farming. It's less antagonistic, I think. And regenerative farmers they're like a fraternity, a brotherhood.
Yeah.
We share common goals, and it's fun to associate with regenerative farmers. So,
and you touch on a lot of interesting topics that I'd like to actually dive into more. But
sure,
I think some of our viewers and listeners maybe aren't that familiar with what no-till, cover crop, regenerative agriculture means. Like, maybe if you could start with, because I think more people would be familiar with organic farming, maybe already in Europe, even biodynamic farming, but in other places, precision agriculture and that. So if you could explain what regenerative agriculture is, let's say, for those that maybe aren't too familiar with it.
I think everybody has their own definition of what is regenerative agriculture, because it's one of those terms that gets thrown around, but it's very seldom defined. And my definition of regenerative agriculture is a system of farming in which the soil improves, the resource base improves. If you're improving the soil and you're improving the environment, you're making cleaner water, cleaner air, fewer toxins. To me, that's regenerative agriculture, and not just regenerating the natural system, but you're also regenerating the people and the communities that depend on the people. Because if that doesn't happen, then none of the other things happen. You have to, the farmer has to make money. And you have to have a system in which we rebuild communities. You can't have a system where the local communities are dying. And I see that where I live in Kansas in the United States. The rural communities are shrinking. Everybody's moving to the cities. And the populations are growing older. Young people aren't moving back. And I see the same as I've traveled throughout Europe as well. And it's very sad. incredibly sad when that happens. So all those things have to be true, in my mind, to call it regenerative agriculture.
So it's really a holistic approach that really involves you could say the whole trajectory of the food that we're producing and that we're eating. So it's not only the producers, the distributors, the consumers as well. It's food is such an essential role in and our interaction with nature in the end, because we're integrating nature as well and the principles in this let's say regenerative agriculture and the local communities, of course.
And the food produced, and I'm glad you touched on that, because obviously the primary goal of agriculture, produce food. And the food we produce, we have to produce an abundance of food, and we have to produce food of high nutrient density. The food has to be healthy. It can't just be empty calories. And there's been numerous studies. I saw a study from the UK. I saw a study from the University of Texas in the USA about how they sampled the nutrient density of food from 1940 every decade. And the nutrient density declined alarmingly every generation. Why is this happening? Is it because the crops have changed? Has modern breeding focused only on yield and we've sacrificed nutrient density? Or has our soil changed? And the indications are that it's our soil that has changed. We've depleted our soil. And in what manner have we depleted our soil? Well, our organic matter has gone down in our soils because tillage tends to deplete organic matter. The longer we till, and prior to 1940, people would use green manure, which is essentially a cover crop that gets tilled into the soil, but it was a source of, organic nitrogen, carbon-based fertility, and livestock manure, including horse manure. We've replaced horses with tractors. So we no longer have the horse manure, and the manures, we've increasingly had animals in confinement rather than out on the land, because mechanization has made that easier to have animals in confinement. So we've deprived our crop growing areas of livestock manure, and synthetic fertilizers have replaced green manures. So synthetic fertilizers, I'm not anti-fertilizer. I'll occasionally use fertilizers. But I prefer a system in which they're not necessary. If I can get by with never having to buy synthetic fertilizer, that would be my preference. Because, I look at these inputs like antibiotics. If I get sick, antibiotic is a wonderful tool. It's probably saved my life a couple times. And I think most people can say that antibiotics at some point have saved their lives. But I don't want to take antibiotics every day. If I have to take antibiotics every day, that's a sign that there's something wrong with the system. When we routinely use, herbicides, insecticide, synthetic fertilizers, to me, that's a sign that something's wrong with our system, and we need to go make changes. So those inputs are rare, but I'm not in favor of banning those inputs. eliminating those inputs. They're a useful tool when we need them. Just reduce our reliance on them. So
yeah, it seems like really a non-dogmatic approach, you could say, to agriculture. It's seeing health as something holistic. So the human health, the soil health, really nourishing the soil microbiome, and also you could say the gut or the human microbiome. And that really just brings everything together. And just now that you're talking about that, it makes me think that we are really part of nature, our ecosystem. So what we're trying to, you could say, fight and dominate maybe in some way is actually us. It's actually part of us. I mean, maybe I'm going a bit too far, but from what you're saying, it really makes me think of that.
I think there is, human behavior is often related to the method in which we farm. And tillage-based agriculture throughout history has, when you ruin your soil as a society, when you ruin your soil, tillage, if you have a soil that's never been tilled, and you till that soil, and you oxidize your organic matter in that soil and turn it into available nitrogen, you see this huge explosion of growth. You know, it's like receiving an inheritance, and you just say, I want cash. That's what that first tillage trip is. It's like, wow, this is good. I'm going to till every year, and every year you you spend more of your inheritance. Yeah. And eventually you run out of that inheritance. And then once you've run out of that soil organic matter inheritance, and your land no longer produces because you've depleted it, and you have 20 children to feed, yeah. What do? You go take land from your neighbor, because you value your children more than your neighbor. So you go to the next, you go conquer other lands. And that's been human history. That's been, if you read the Bible is full of, warfare, battles over land. Why do we fight battles over land? Because our land doesn't give us the resources that we feel we need. They say, well, land is essential. It's because what land provides us is rare. It's scarce. People say we fight over resources. Well, we fight over scarce resources. Oxygen is incredibly valuable. We'll die in 2 minutes without oxygen. Why don't we fight over oxygen? Because it's abundant. If we can create abundance through our system of agriculture, where everybody has what they need, what would we do for this planet and for the people on it? Wouldn't it be wonderful if we all had unlimited healthy food? Plenty of clean water and abundant water. And we could completely, if we change our agriculture, we could change everything. We could change the way humans live upon this earth.
Wow, that's a massive impact. And on that note, so since the conventional approach to agriculture is the conventional, so it's the one that's most practiced, at
Yes.
least in let's say the northern hemisphere, most so, and also in the southern hemisphere, let's say the large scale agriculture, even some small scale agriculture, you could say. So why do we keep doing it that way if we know that it's not benefiting the earth's health, the soil health, and our own health?
Oh,
it's a big question.
that's a huge question. And I ask myself this all the time. And actually my wife and business partner, Dr. Elizabeth Heilman, has studied this. Why do people not change in the face of information stating that, it's more profitable? When change is more profitable and more productive, and not only does it make more money, but it makes life better, not just for you, but for everybody. Why do people resist this change? And there's a number of reasons, but it's less logical than it is emotional. It's like, farming is a very unique occupation. And it's hard for people outside of agriculture to understand. It's not just a job. Say, well, just quit and do something else. Are you insane? You don't just quit farming and do something else. Because for many of us who, farming is a family business. And when you make a change, it's almost an insult to our ancestors. It's like, if I do something different, that means they were doing something wrong. It means that before I made this change, I was doing something wrong. I was doing something stupid, and it's hard for us emotionally to handle that. And there's also risk. It's how much are you risking? When your willingness to make a change depends on the risk involved in that change. If I have nothing to lose, it's easy. Yeah. If I have a lot to lose, it's difficult. And when you make that change, you say, I may lose this farm. And this farm was given to me by my father and by his grandfather before him, and in generations. Will I be the one to break that chain? And my hope is that I give this farm to my children. Will I be disappointing my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and also my children, because I made a poor decision to change what had been working? I say working in quotation marks, because is it really working? But it's that's very difficult. People don't understand, this is not just a job. It's a legacy, and it's a legacy that we received, and a legacy we hope to pass on. It's our retirement. It's our children's future. There's a lot to risk, and it's very frightening. And I think the way you eliminate a lot of that fear is through education. If you make a change and you have no idea what the results of that change are going to be, it's frightening. And when you have a lot to risk. But if you say, okay, I'm going to switch from conventional tillage to no-till, and I know what's going to happen. Will my yields go down? Some people lose yield when they make that switch. Others gain yield. Why do some gain? Well, you look at what happens to your ability to establish a good population of plants. Can you place seed to the proper depth? Will the soil be the proper temperature relative to a tilled soil? Can you close the furrow slice over? Can you keep it from drying out and cracking open. Those are all things that can be more difficult when you change. Any planter works well in tilled soil. When you have that loose tilled soil, it's easy to put seeds to the proper depth. The soil is loose, so it covers the seed trench. And it's all crumbly, so it doesn't crack open when it dries, unless you planted too wet. Yeah. Then it happens. And we all know, if you farm very long, you don't plant when it's too wet. So the reasons that those issues are a problem in historically tilled soils that transition to no-till is because our soils lack organic matter. We don't have enough organic matter. And what if our soils did have enough organic matter? Then your soil naturally becomes loose and soft and crumbly. And none of those things are issues. How do we get more organic matter? We stop tilling and we grow cover crops. That's long term though. Yeah. What about the first year? And so if you understand that these things are going to happen when you eliminate tillage, if you know that before you make that change, then you can say, I need to do this in order to place my seeds better. I need this type of equipment. I know that my seed trench is going to be more difficult to close. I need this attachment on the back of the planter. If you know those things in advance, you can anticipate those changes, be proactive, rather than experience a big yield depression and say, it just doesn't work around here, and give up. Yeah. Because that's what usually happens. Yeah. People didn't know that these things, these minor, seemingly minor issues, they all add up. Yeah. So, but all farming works better when you have more soil organic matter.
Yeah, 100%.
And so shouldn't our goal be to farm in a manner that increases our soil organic matter? No-till cover crops. Those are, big practice in my mind. Everybody has their own definition of regenerative agriculture, but I think those are, to me, the biggest in arable farming. Those are the biggest issues. Yeah. You could throw grazing in there as well. I have a passion for grazing management. It's, again, if you understand, we have the status quo of grazing is what we call the Columbus grazing method. Well,
colonial.
you turn your cattle out in the spring. Your cattle set sail in the spring, and 5 months later you go discover them. It's just like Columbus set sail and 5 months later discovered, the New World, or at least discovered it to Europeans. And that's how we've all grazed, essentially. But when you truly see how grass plants operate and how you see how incredibly inefficient that system is, and how poorly it works with we get natural herds, herds of bison in the U.S. or whatever. They would move in large groups and they'd migrate. And they didn't just stay in one place with a fence around them. Once we started putting animals behind fences, then the migration was no longer possible. So the migration allowed rest periods. And they wouldn't take very much at a time. And the bison in North America, in my area is warm season grasslands. C4, if you're familiar with grass physiology, they're C4 carbon fixing mechanism. So they require warm temperatures. We have a 4-month growing season for those grasses. So the bison could only eat 1/3 of the grass during the growing season. Because there's 12 months in a year, you do the math. If they ate more than 1/3 during the growing season, the herd would starve before spring arrived. They would run out of food. So starvation kept their population in line with a defoliation rate of only 1/3 in the growing season. During the dormant season, defoliation can be 100%, but not during the growing season. And with mechanization and haymaking, we no longer have to abide by those rules. We can put animals and eat 100% during the growing season, which is horribly destructive to the grassland. And then we use other area to make hay to keep the animals alive. Now, it's not that mechanization is bad by itself, but it can enable bad decision making.
And also what I found really interesting, when we were in, just a few days ago, we were in northern Czech Republic visiting a farm, and you were saying that as an agronomist, what you did initially also in your home town in Kansas, you focused on the soil initially and on the grasses, on what was growing.
Yes.
But if you were to backtrack and start again, you would have looked at the infrastructure. I remember you used that term of the, let's say, how I like to look at it, going from the patterns to the details, in a way.
Yes.
So let's say that's. And if you could talk more about that approach and looking at the infrastructure.
Yes, and it's probably more important here than it is in the U.S. because of how scattered and uneven the land ownership and land tenancy is here. We tend to have, we're not completely contiguous, but we're much more we have land side by side by side oftentimes, and you don't often have that here. You have a lot of very small scattered fields, and from what I've seen, that makes things difficult, makes livestock movement difficult. And so, and much of this is because of your history of feudalism, you know, where one person owned all this land, and, you know, people were allotted a very small amount of land area. And that's, you know, there's, this person owns this very small piece of land, and this person, you know, once feudalism ended and land ownership, you know, people, so you know what I mean. It's
like, that's a common, let's say, European.
Yeah, it's you know, a remnant of feudalism, and we didn't have that history. You know, we had big, broad expanses. That was, I mean, obviously there's sad history of, you know, genocide to obtain that land in the United States. But we had people granted a relatively large land area, all in one spot. So these things are much easier in much of the United States, especially in the plains area where I am. Now, the eastern coast of the United States is more similar to here. Lots of, you know, the same land ownership patterns and the irregular shaped fields at natural boundaries. Where I am, things are in 1.6 kilometer by 1.6 kilometer rectangles. And so completely different, management methods. But even in that system, where everything's together, my preliminary focus was on the plants. I'm an agronomist, so I love plants. I focused on plants. I focused on soil fertility, and soil biology, and the correct plant species, and the sequence of movement of the livestock. I focused on plants first and livestock second. And the infrastructure was my final concerns. And looking back, I should have put water development number one and fence development number two. Because almost when I started this intensive grazing, I didn't know anybody else who was doing this. I had no mentors. I had no one to talk to. Anybody I spoke to about it said, that won't work around here. Just do it like everybody else. I couldn't accept that because I knew that the science behind all these things is sound. It's ironclad, but I had no experience. I knew no one with experience. So I was making the mistakes on my own. And the mistakes I made were not getting the water right. Like the watering location was too far away from where the livestock were at this time of year. There wasn't enough capacity for them to gather around at one time. The calves had difficulty drinking out of my water system, especially the cows would drink their fill, start walking back to the grazing. The calves would get frightened, would not drink water, would follow their mothers instead. And so I had inadequate, there's the fencing, I had fences going the wrong direction. I had, I didn't take into account, the patterns of livestock movement where they walk into the wind in the summertime. They walk away from the wind in the wintertime. I didn't, just subtle things like that. Sharp bends in the fence where I was, the cattle would not want to turn here. So those are the things I should have focused on initially. And Alan Nation, he's sadly passed away a few years ago, but he was the editor of Stockman Grass Farmer magazine. And he had a saying, a lot of farmers like me focus on plants. What kind of pasture should I plant? What kind of plants should I have in my pasture? And he said, don't plant anything except fence posts the first year. He said, because that's more important than what kind of plants you have. I completely ignored that advice to my own peril. So, the water distribution is probably the single most important aspect of managed grazing. Fencing, number 2. The plants are number 3. Well, I would say the soil is number 3. Plants number 4, and livestock number 5. And most people with livestock have that priority list completely inverted, including me.
Yeah, and I'd like to, because we sometimes, or what we do at Carboneg is we reach out to partners abroad, and we would like to, let's say, pass on this approach to agriculture abroad. And sometimes there's this, or often there's this fear that, okay, this is a approach that is maybe for people in the north who can afford to import food and that, but here in the south we can't take these risks, and we need to grow food because we need to eat. And I know you've said before that regenerative agriculture works everywhere because nature works everywhere. So really observing the natural environment, the ecology. But let's say if we go to something more concrete, so you talk about no-till and using cover crops. And I know you said before that no-till, no cover is no good.
Yes.
So if a farmer around the world would like to start doing regenerative agriculture, would doing no-till and cover crops in a practical sense, so once they've understood the local agro-ecosystem and the infrastructure, when it comes to the first practices they can implement to really see a big change, would no-till and cover crops be one of the primary practices?
Yes, I believe so.
And why marrying them? Why is that the best approach?
Most of the problems I talked about, like just with the planting operation in switching to no-till, you know, the soil gets initially more compact because it doesn't have that mechanical loosening, and you fix it, you know, all the planting operation things because of the failure to get seed to the proper depth. You solve that with organic matter, which comes from cover crops. The failure of the seed trench to close properly, that is solved with organic matter, which comes from cover crops. You know, it's like the tillage breaks down soil organic matter, which releases nitrogen. When you no longer till, you're not getting that, what seems like free it's not really free nitrogen, it's just you're cashing in your savings account. You're turning your savings account into cash. So it's not free, it's just a withdrawal. Yeah. But if you don't account for that, well, how do you account for it without buying more fertilizer? Nitrogen fixing cover crops, you know, legumes. Almost all the problems in no-till can be solved with cover crops. They really are very, very synergistic, and I preach about both of these practices because of that synergy, and encourage, you know, but because you're adding complexity. When I say that the barriers to adoption of regenerative agriculture are not logical, they're emotional. And when you say, oh, I have to learn how to all these changes about no-till, said, that's enough. I don't put more on my plate. You know, I don't want to have to learn about cover crops as well. But they really do have a synergy, and adopting them in unison is almost always more successful than independently. Now, cover crops have their own set of challenges as well. And the most common objection to cover crops, of course, is moisture use. And I don't get enough rain to grow one crop. How can I grow two? And when you look at what happens over time, a growing cover crop does use moisture. Once it's terminated and you create a mulch on the soil surface, every rain you receive after that will infiltrate better and evaporate less. So it's an investment. You invest moisture now to make better use of the moisture you receive in the future more efficiently. If you don't understand that that's going to happen, and you grow a cover crop and you see it's a dry year and you see a yield decrease in that first crop, then that's when a lot of people quit. It doesn't work around here. You have to understand the moisture dynamics. It's not a magic yield increasing bullet. You have to understand the principles that those cover crops are operating upon. When you do, then you can weather because you understand why things happen. Yeah. So when you understand the why, you can adjust your practices accordingly.
Again, that role of observing, of asking why, not just, oh, this is happening, so I need to buy this pesticide, or I need to buy this.
Or just give up the practice. It doesn't work around here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that they do in Europe or in the US.
Yeah, it works, 15 kilometers from here, but it doesn't work here. There's always a reason.
Yeah.
And it's never because it just doesn't work around here. There's always a reason. It's, did I achieve an appropriate stand? Did I have proper nitrogen availability? Did, I harbor more slugs, or did I, have more disease pressure, and how can I manage those problems without tillage and by managing my cover crop differently? Best fertilizer is the farmer's footprint. And it's not because there's something magical about our feet. The idea is that constant observation of your crop, and not just observing, but asking why. Why am I seeing what I'm seeing? When you do that, and I recommend people keep a journal. Note your observations. Look at what's happening. Take notes. And I have a friend who's
like-minded people.
Yeah.
Community.
150 years ago, his ancestors came over from Germany and to Kansas, and have farmed in the same area ever since. And the original settler there began keeping a journal. And the family has retained those journals for 150 years. They're absolutely fascinating. He talks about, when the crickets came and wiped out the crop, and this talks about weather patterns, and it's absolutely fascinating to read those journals and think about what a gift that could be for your children, your grandchildren, to have generations of accumulated wisdom. They say wisdom comes from bad experiences. Bad experiences come from poor judgment. So if you want to be wise, make bad decisions. But it's if you can benefit from someone else's experiences, what a gift to pass on to your and to anyone. Share the ability to share your experiences,
as you're doing with us today. We're learning from your experience, and unfortunately we've run out of time. I would have loved to ask you many more questions and really dive deeper into many other topics, and of course our listeners and viewers can even look at your one that I've really enjoyed reading is maybe your more recent book, so A Complete Guide to Restoring Your Soil. You've written other two previous ones, but our viewers and listeners, please do look up the rest of Dale's work and look at his website. Regenerative
and that
Wisdom.
book is in Czech.
Yes, we also have a Czech version, which is it's fantastic that we have it, and hopefully it'll be translated to many other languages. Is it translated to any other languages? Not yet. So please, if anyone's listening, or please, if you can translate it to your local languages, I think it can benefit a lot of people, farmers, and also just consumers to understand the importance of growing food on our planet and environment. So thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you for having me here. It's been fun. So
it's an honor.
I love to listen to myself talk.
As we do too.
Maybe we can do this again and I can actually answer all of your questions.
Yes. I'll keep them. I'll save them. And is there any final, let's say, any final words you'd like to share with farmers listening, to even, I mean, probably giving you a broad number of people, but even, let's say, if there's any government or policy, people that are influencing policy listening, and that, are there anything you would like to share?
I think the best advice I can give to farmers, we were having this conversation earlier this morning, the farmers, you ask them to spend $800,000 on a new combine. Sure, write the check. You know, it's almost $1 million. That's a lifetime of money for a lot of people. It's an entire lifetime of money, and farmers think nothing of writing a check for this massive amount of machinery whose value goes down every year. But the most important piece of equipment on your farm is not that combine. It's not a tractor. It's your brain. It's your mind. The most important investment you can make is learning. Invest in learning. Podcasts like this, books, seminars, meetings, even just taking a trip to a neighboring farmer who's doing something that a practice that you're interested in. Take the time, money, and energy and invest in your brain. Best advice I can give.
Fantastic. Amazing. Well, Dale, thank you again for joining us on this podcast. Yeah, I'm sure all the spectators will be grateful to gain this information, this knowledge that you pass on to us. And please do check out his books, Regenerative Wisdom. Any other project you're working on? Besides the immense project, I imagine, that Regenerative Wisdom is.
Yes. Well, one thing we're trying to put together is a tour of the United States, an regenerative agriculture tour of the United States, targeted towards international visitors. And with the idea that not only do you come and learn from the farmers along the tour, but that we have participants from a number of different countries around the globe, and you learn from each other. You have that information exchange.
Fantastic.
In between the tour stops. I think it'll be a wonderful experience. Amazing. So something I'm currently excited about. So
amazing. All right. Thanks again, and see you in the next episode.
Thank you.